Hello, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the 10th Stroke Recovery Group. You guys know me, Karen, Dr. Sullivan. I'm very happy to be all together again one last time before we conclude our group. I am definitely bummed about it and will be thinking very hard with Carrie about what our next steps are going to be in this wonderful stroke community. You all have welcomed us so much, and we so enjoy being here with you. So what we're going to do tonight is to go through a review of everything we've done in these last 9 weeks. Can you all believe it's been 9 weeks since we've been together? It was warm enough at one point to have a couple critters be visiting us here in North Carolina. Now it feels much too cold for that. So we're going to review where we've been and really try to tie it all together and talk about what are some of the most important big picture steps in your recovery once you have figured out the what's. What am I supposed to do? What type of therapy? How often should I do it? What we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit more of that big picture kind of psychological feeling. So we always start off with a nice recap of where we were in Rule 9. Rule number 9 was to insist on follow-up care, learning how to develop a system to keep your long-term recovery on track. That is really important. Many times we feel that our care was excellent during the emergent stage when we were in the hospital or in the rehab. And then when you're out on your own, you have to be your secretary, you have to be scheduling things, keeping things in order, and it can be overwhelming, especially at the beginning. So in session 9, I urged you to insist on follow-up care and to follow evidence-based recommendations. And we focused on prioritizing healthy blood flow to the brain. In this stroke recovery group, we focused a lot on the causes of ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke. Ischemic being too little blood to a part of the brain, and hemorrhagic being too much blood to a part of the brain. So we want to get it just right. We don't want too much as to get into blood vessels that are under great pressure and have them leak blood into the brain, but we also want to guard against any type of blockages. Follow-up care after a stroke is needed for two main reasons. We talked about the prevention of another stroke through behavior change and your long-term recovery. When folks don't make significant health changes, about 23% of stroke survivors will go on to have a second stroke. And I know that's the last thing that you want. Your post-stroke health goals should be related to healthy blood flow. It's very important to know your personal risk factors for stroke if they're known, and reduce them by following scientific recommendations and your doctor's advice. So we talked about that happy blood cells are open and elastic blood vessels, sorry. Open and elastic blood vessels are happy blood vessels because we want them to be open so as much blood can go through and bring all of that necessary fuel, oxygen, and glucose into the brain cells. But we also don't want them to be stiff. We want them to be free from disease so that way they can expand if we need more blood and energy in a given body system, including the brain, or they can narrow down a little bit if it's not that important. We talked about how during medical appointments, you have 3 jobs. The first one is communicating, going in with perhaps a written plan, and an informant, a strong advocate with you to make sure that you are using that time wisely to appropriately communicate. These are my priorities in my rehab. Here's anything specific that's going on with me. It's really not possible nowadays to wing it. You really have to go in there with an agenda. Number 2 was to listen. You don't want to be so caught up in what you want to say that you don't use that limited time with the doctor or the PA or the nurse practitioner to get their expertise. Okay, so you have to be a good listener. And I always want you to advocate for a next step care plan. And what I mean by that is making sure you let them know, this is where I am in my recovery with this symptom that's bothering me or limiting my quality of life or my independence. What is it that I can do next to help move my recovery along? You might have to ask for a referral. And again, in this day and age, you might have to really be on top of those referrals. I can tell you from a lot of my patients, they are told they're going to get a referral placed, and it just, for whatever reason, it goes through too many hands, it falls through the cracks on either side of the doctor's office. So you might have to learn to be comfortable with advocating all along the care continuum. We also talked about the very real possibility that at some point you can run out of options in the traditional healthcare system. Your insurance company can tell you you don't have any sessions left. You can be told you don't qualify for any more equipment. And in that case, I encouraged you to BYOB, better your own brain. And that's a huge reason that I Care for Your Brain with Dr. Sullivan, me, was created, was to try to fill that gap for people who didn't get enough information in the traditional medical system, who didn't have access to comprehensive enough care to make their very best recovery. Some people don't have insurance. Some people live too far away to be able to get the one-on-one intensive therapy that they need. And luckily, you are recovering at a time in the world where a ton of information is online. I mean, even just 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, forget it. We would have had no opportunity to meet for these last 2 weeks. So I know that I'm very, very grateful for that. YouTube is really a wonderful resource. You do want to make sure, though, that you guide yourself towards evidence-based, science-based products and information. A huge reason that I was inspired to do this type of outreach education is the levels of exploitation in our brain health community are really through the roof. And a lot of times in my experience, they come in the form of supplements, things that are not covered by traditional medical insurance, that have no or very little scientific evidence. And if you've done everything known to mankind that we've talked about in this recovery group, and you've maximized to the best of your ability every rehab suggestion I've made, and you still feel like you want to try more, and you have the money, and you're not going to be sacrificing yourself or someone else's well-being, then I say you can have a more open mind. There's a very real impact of a placebo effect. If you really believe that something might help you, there's a 20% chance it could change how you're doing just based on your positive beliefs about it. And hey, I don't really care why you get better. We just want you to get better. So we get concerned about cost. We get concerned about people wasting time on different brain games that might not necessarily work. And we really get concerned when people's hope is on the line. If you try something that has big, grand promises and it doesn't deliver, we don't want you to throw away the baby with the bathwater, right? We want you to always go back to evidence-based medicine to get your bearings and be informed about exactly where it is you're trying to go in the future. So now what we're going to do is go to rule number 10, the final rule in the I Care for Your Brain Stroke Recovery Guide. Rule number 10 is the transformational power of acceptance. I want you to approach acceptance with the same tenacity that you do all other aspects of your recovery. And the reason we don't do this is because, again, we are so focused on the outward recovery in stroke. You've heard me say this now. If you've been with me over these 10 weeks, you've heard me say this over and over. We focus too much on the physical. We don't focus enough on the mental health side of having a stroke and recovering from a stroke. And we certainly don't give people enough practical tips on how to start embracing the idea of acceptance. And in my experience as a clinical neuropsychologist, what I find is people don't even want to have this conversation because they start to feel that me as the doctor is giving up on them. There's nothing more that can be done. This is the way it's going to be. And we really don't believe that. It's equally as true, however, that not every person is going to have a great recovery. There's some strokes that are just too severe, too damaging, that the person will live with a very high degree of disability. And then there's everybody else in the middle, right? And so what we don't want to do is believe any myths that stroke recovery has an endpoint. We don't want you to believe that it's only in the first year or two that you're going to see any recovery. All of those things are false. But there's really a place for acceptance. And so today what we're going to talk about is, what is that? What does it feel like? And what are some practical tips for that journey of how to get there? After a stroke, there are changes in the ability to do things that previously defined us. And this is challenging, to say the very least. And many people have told me they feel lost in the process. There can be this feeling of, I can't go back to work. Who am I? It feels like my relationship with my spouse has changed. Who am I? I can't walk the way I used to. I can't talk the way I used to. And so within a moment's notice, all of a sudden, there are significant changes. And as we've talked about, that's the definition of a traumatic event. And it's a lot. It's really a lot. The tough determination that you need to push through an intense therapy session will benefit you. There's no doubt about that. We want you to approach this recovery with a certain amount of grit and, you know, kind of fierce energy that's going to get you the best result. But there's also a time and a place at various points in the recovery journey to also focus on acceptance, okay? And if you approach acceptance in the same way that you approach all these other aspects of your recovery, it really can have a transformational effect. So I always like to break things down into their most accessible terms. So if we just think about the word acceptance, what does that really mean? This was the best definition that I could find. The non-judgmental openness to what is in the here and now. And when we embrace acceptance, this can improve our quality of life and our relationship with ourselves and with others. And this is the key message of rule number 10. Acceptance does not mean giving up. It actually is a whole other path in your recovery. It is a dynamic state of mind and not a permanent way most people feel. For most people, acceptance is like an ocean wave. It comes, it goes, it feels close, it feels far. Some days it might feel completely impossible to wrap your head around accepting what has changed as a function of the stroke. And there might be other days where, God, I just feel like I've really made progress and I've got this. What I want you to understand is it's not a static, stable state of mind. There's sometimes it's going to feel a little bit outside your reach, and that's okay. Where faith comes in is feeling like this is a natural cycle, just like the ocean waves. And if I wait a little bit, I'm very confident that very soon it's going to feel like a part of me and much closer to me. So acceptance is really the opposite of resistance. And I want you to just think for a minute, how do these two things feel in your body? Okay, because this is a big deal. When we accept something, it's accompanied by a light feeling of peace and comfort. There's kind of like a expansive feeling, right? Now, look at the difference in body language in resistance, right? Think of the times where you just can't accept something. You're still really stuck in the limitations of what has changed in your life. This is often accompanied by a very heavy feeling of tension and resentment, okay? These two people here in our slide have two totally different neurochemical environments in their brain. The woman on my left, the one who is really fostering acceptance and making time and focusing on the present and being here and now, you can see from the little smile on her face and her good posture, right? That's how she looks on the outside. On the inside, she's limiting the amount of stress hormones that her adrenal glands are releasing. She's releasing good, positive, brain healthy hormones and chemicals, things like oxytocin, things like good melatonin, things that are healthy to the cells in your whole body, and especially your neurons in your brain. The woman on the right, who's kind of all tense and hunched over, she is certainly not cranking out any positive, feel good, happy, content hormones, right? She's got a ton of adrenaline. The muscle tension is unbelievable. Look at her posture, you know, and even the symbolism of how she's kind of holding her head. I was stressed about something the other day and I noticed I was kind of like this, and I thought, wow, there you go. The thoughts in my head, the feelings I have in my head, they're literally too heavy for me to carry and I needed help. You know, this is how psychologists think, right? And so what I want you to remember is the way that you look on the outside, the way that you feel on the inside, then translates back into your brain. And remember from some of our earliest sessions, what we talked about is, in essence, what we're trying to do in a stroke recovery is to set the stage for neuroplasticity. And we're trying to create the most fertile ground in your brain garden to do that. And that requires fertile soil, right? We have to get sunshine in there. We have to get fresh air. We don't want it to be dark and doom and gloom. We want to feel a sense of confidence. We want to feel a sense of not resisting things, right? When we resist things, our breath gets very shallow, and there we're limiting our oxygen. So that's the opposite of what we want in a stroke recovery. When we're tense, our muscles get really, really short, and it makes it hard for the whole body to be acting in unison. And if we have an arm that's not working, or we have some difficulty, with fingers or legs or toes, we want the whole body to be acting in concert. We don't want there to be any type of tension, right? We're trying to get the whole brain and the whole body to communicate to each other. If you believe that you must return to the exact way you were before your stroke in order to consider yourself to be recovered, to be whole, to be healed, you need this message today, okay? Even a near complete recovery does not return you to a carbon copy return of your previous life. And again, some of you might not have even thought about this, but you could have kind of an unconscious, pre-conscious belief that that's the goal here. The goal is to return to life the way it was. The goal was to be just like I was before. And I don't think that that's possible, even if we're just talking from a psychological point of view, okay? This is my personal belief that anything traumatic, life-changing, intense that happens in a very short amount of time is going to change the way you view yourself and is going to change the way you view the world. And this was something that we talked about 2 sessions ago when we talked about trauma and stroke-related PTSD. That the real impact is on how it changes your sense of security, trust, intimacy, your comfort level being in your own body, your ability to make good decisions, your ability to feel safe in the world. And that's what we're talking about here is what is the lens, the stroke lens that you now look through to view the rest of your life and your future. And that lens you have more control over than you might realize. So acknowledging the changes that have happened and working to love yourself, others, and the world because of them is the task of acceptance. So there are experts in psychology. We have not just experts in psychology, but people often study very specific things their whole career. And there are psychologists that just study acceptance. And what's interesting is that we find that the same journey, the same recovery path for stroke holds for cancer, holds for childhood abuse, holds for divorce. There is a process of grief, there's a process of recovery, and there's a process of acceptance. And typically we find human beings go through 4 stages. And as I'm reading this, I want you to just think a little bit about where am I now in my journey and what will be the next step for me as I go forward. The first one is shock. I'm sure that many of you can relate to this idea of remembering what it was like to be in the hospital, to be in rehab, maybe the first few weeks, maybe even the first few months. It just takes time to really understand what has happened, okay? That's a very normal thing. The next one is defensive retreat. And what do we mean by that? A lot of people go through this stage. This is sometimes isolating yourself, feeling like no one can understand, pushing other people away, not really thinking about what's happened too much. Basically, I think it's really a protective action where we try to create kind of a wall around ourselves because we're so vulnerable. And that's a very natural thing to do. And people do this to varying degrees. Remember, just like with traumatic stress, you may have a smidge, you may be overwhelmed by it. Number 3 is acknowledgement. That is really that self-validation that we talked about a few sessions ago. Even if you're the only one in the world who understands what's changed or how life is different now, you have to express that, you have to articulate that, you have to get clear with yourself on what that means. And then there is a grieving process for it and a self-compassion that really has to happen. We've talked in the past about negative self-talk, and it's really powerful. And what's so crazy about self-talk is very often, until we look for it, until we really listen for it, we're often not even aware that we're doing it. And this is that pause between an action that happens to us and then our feelings or our thoughts about it, right? Before you understand this part of psychology, it just feels like a lock and key fit. And the minute something happens, move myself here. The minute something happens, it's like, oh, that made me feel bad, or oh, that makes me feel happy. But the truth is, there's a millisecond pause where we interpret what happened according to these beliefs that we have in our head. And that's why it's so important to do the work in therapy and counseling to figure out, what is it that you really think about yourself now? What is it that you really think about your body now, your world now? You need to understand those deeper layers of how this stroke has affected you. And then what we ultimately work on is adaptation. Adaptation means, instead of resisting the effects, we understand that we need to lean into them a little bit more, try to find some of that post-traumatic growth, those silver linings that we talked about so beautifully a few sessions back. Like, I feel more grateful to be alive. I feel more confident that the people in my life who care about me will really show up if I need them, right? These are some of the most important life lessons for all of humanity, right? Not just those of us who've been through something really rough. The road to acceptance is definitely not a straight road. You don't go from A to B to C to D. You hop around a little bit, and sometimes you're further and sometimes you're back a little bit. But for most people, there are 8 action steps that are involved in the process of feeling that you can accept when something has changed. And it wasn't a decision you made, right? I think that's such a critical part of trauma. If we were the decision makers and in a very short amount of time our life changed, that's really different than feeling like in a very short amount of time something happened that you didn't have any control over. Okay, so the first one I think is so important, which is that you can't rush recovery. It's going to take time to comprehend what's happened here. It's not something that can be rushed. I think grief and recovery have a very organic, natural way of evolving, and it's different for each person. And it's our job to kind of help the reaction and the grief along, but we also really just have to respect where it's going. That's a really deep one. For each of these, you know, we could spend a half hour kind of meditating on each one, but I think sometimes, especially if people are overachievers or if they are a little bit perfectionistic, there's a feeling like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it quick, I'm going to do it super efficient. And people get very frustrated when the natural course happens, which is up and down, sideways, back, focused, unfocused, you know, a recovery spurt, then maybe a plateau. That's kind of the name of the game in all recovery, physical or emotional. Number 2 is that acknowledgement of what has changed, and for some people, what they have lost. If you just try to go full blown into getting that recovery back of your arm and don't have some pauses in there to grieve about what has been lost, then, you know, it's kind of stuffing it, and it's filling you up inside emotionally, as opposed to facing it, talking about it with a trusted person, grieving for it, and then moving on. The point is not to stay stuck in your grief, but it is a necessary pit stop on the way. That's true. There's just no way around that. And this relates to rule number 3, which is giving yourself permission to grieve. I just 2 days ago spoke to a woman who has been through some of the most stressful things. It wasn't a stroke. This was more on the topics of child abuse and domestic violence, and saw someone in her family be killed when she was a teenager. And it was just a lot. It was really hard to hear. And my heart just went out to her so much. And she said to me, you know, the thing is, I can't even cry because I'm afraid if once I start, I'm never going to stop. And I think that's part of this, which is if I go there, I don't know if I'll have control over it. But this ties back to something we talked about a few weeks ago, which is that idea of once you try to open the floodgates on what's happened to you, you don't want to just, turn on the faucet full blast. You have to, that's why therapy is so helpful, because a trusted, skilled professional can slowly walk you through going there, can help you pull back a little bit if you start to feel overwhelmed. That's why we talked about those grounding techniques. If you start to grieve and then it does feel like, tsunami coming at you, that's not exactly psychological wellness either, right? And so we want to give you permission to grieve, but we also want to create an environment around you that's going to help you be supported and kind of do it in the safe way. Okay. Number 4 is focusing on what you can still do and finding ways to do the things that are hard for you, that you value, through creativity and support from others. There's such a tendency with our trauma goggles to focus on the negative, what we can't do. And again, I'm not taking it away from anyone that, of course, there's feelings that it's depressing and sad and frustrating if we can't use a hand or an arm, but we don't want to have that take up our entire view, right? What's really important is identifying our values in life, what really matters to us. And how can I still live those values no matter if I have a physical limitation, a cognitive limitation, if I have emotional or behavioral symptoms that are hard to control. We just always want to keep going into the direction of our values. And oftentimes we can do that through creativity, meaning different ways of going about something. Just because you can't do a previous hobby the same way since you've had your stroke, the worst thing in the world would be to give it up completely. And I just can't tell you how many times I hear this. I hear it all the time. I used to really like horseback riding. Well, have you been to the stable since you had your stroke? No, I haven't been in 3 years. I can't go there anymore. Well, why can't you go? Well, if I can't do it the way I used to do, I think I'm going to be too sad and it's going to make me upset. And to me, that is so distressing, because now this person, remember our brain networks, now this person isn't getting any stimulation about horses, how they smell, how they feel, what they look like, the beautiful nonverbal of interacting with an animal, right? I don't really know horses. I don't understand horses. I'm from New Jersey. I lived in Boston for 20 years. I'm new to the South, but I know my Southern family down here, a lot of them know and understand horses. And I get from them that horses are incredibly healing and incredibly powerful because of this very sensitive communication that you can have with these animals. And so just think of all those brain networks in that person's brain now aren't getting stimulated because they refuse to go back because they can't do it the way they did before. So, what we talked about was, even if, the person went back, and it might not be the safest thing to get back on a horse right now, but they could certainly, volunteer to brush the horses, even just to be there to watch them and to smell the things that are the good things and the bad things you might smell in a horse stable. It's important. Those things were important to you at one time, and if you allow them, they can still be important to you today. And then, of course, getting support from other people. This can be really hard if you're someone who's always been super independent. But I personally think that so much of the purpose of life is to receive support and to give support when you need it. Give it when you can and accept it when you need it. And we are very social, interdependent creatures. And sometimes it takes a stressor, a trauma, a limitation to be able to really accept support from others. So these are things to really kind of meditate on in the times to come. Number 5 is finding people who have thrived in the face of adversity and let them inspire you. So what I am thinking about here is a TED Talk that I saw a couple years ago. And this was a soldier in the Iraq War who had been in a roadside bomb, and he had both arms and both legs and one eye blown off because of this IED. So this person had no arms, no legs, and one eye. And the TED Talk, I wish I could find it and send it to you all, was basically saying, if I can do it in my circumstance, and I'm truly happy, and I'm married, and I have children, and I'm volunteering, and I'm going out and I'm doing talks, and I'm telling my story, and I'm helping people understand what my recovery journey was like, then let me inspire you that you too have the strength and the bravery and the creativity within yourself to do the very same thing. So I don't like that idea, that there's a limited amount of empathy, or that we should ever compare traumas across people, because that's a real barrier towards recovery that I hear often as well, which is, I'm not gonna, grieve about this because there's so many people who have it worse than me. Trauma is totally relative to you and your life history. We really can't compare trauma. It's really not fair to anyone, but we can be inspired by other people's story. We can have empathy for other people's journey and let it affect our own. Number 6 is finding an activity or a mental interest that makes you feel strong and powerful. And the reason that I like this one so much is this is accessible to almost anyone who's had a stroke, because it involves that visualization if it has to. So when I talk about activities that make people feel powerful, I'm thinking about something that you can master, something that's not difficult. I think that's one of the hardest things when you are doing the uphill walk of a stroke recovery, is the exhaustion of how difficult so many things can be that used to be very straightforward. And I think it's human nature to need a break from that, and to have times where you feel like things are easy and times where you really feel strong and powerful. So, that can mean different things to different people, but even, nighttime visualizations where you imagine yourself doing something, lifting up a 200-pound weight as high as you can and just really feeling the glory of doing that. Or, imagining yourself as a pole vault jumper and, getting the world record. If you are able to do something like, you do solitaire on the computer, anything that you can work at and master, and that gives you a boost of self-esteem, a boost of self-confidence. And again, if you are limited in everyday life and that's not possible, you can always go into your mind and develop some type of mental ritual to really help you focus on feeling of power. I think that's really important. Number 7 is talking it through with a professional or someone close to you who's a good listener and will validate all of your feelings. There's no wrong feelings, even if they're negative, even if they're unhealthy. I believe that there's some type of truth that you need to express with those words. And a good listener will gently push you in the direction of more balanced thoughts, not self-blaming, not wallowing, and not invalidate the right you have to feel that way. Okay. And that's part of being a professional counselor, is we're not trying to tell people how to feel. We believe in people's inherent ability to heal themselves if given the right kind of support. Okay. So finding someone in your life, whether it's calling your insurance company and asking for a therapist who takes your type of health insurance, whether it's finding that friend, whether it's your physical therapist, your speech therapist, your spouse. A good listener is pretty quiet. A good listener isn't trying to change the way you feel, right? And so many people are good intentioned, but they can say some really unhelpful things, anything like, oh, don't think that. That's not true. No, that's invalidating to that person in that moment. It may feel true. In place of it, we can say something like, I can really appreciate how you would feel that way. And maybe that's how you feel today, but tomorrow is a new day. And I'm here to help you work on whatever it is that's bothering you, and hope, building hope. The idea that we're not going to stay in this dark place forever is really, really, really important, to feel like you have a cheerleader, an advocate. Number 8, we've talked about this a little bit, but finding a way to give back, lessening someone else's pain by sharing what you have learned in your recovery so far. And I know that this can be difficult during COVID, because I know some of you were in a good groove with volunteering. Peer-to-peer stroke support programs, to me, are kind of the pinnacle the best way that you could give of your time. And now we're just not able to do that. We don't have as many opportunities for face-to-face interactions. I know a lot of stroke support groups have gone online. So there's an opportunity. And I don't ever want people to feel bad or guilty when they hear this recommendation to give back, because it has to happen in its own sweet time. You can't force this. You can't heal and help other people if you are still in the throes of grief, the shock or the retreat. You really have to work through your own natural cycle of healing. And how you'll know you're doing really well is when you have enough mental energy to start to think about ways that you can help the stroke community. Okay, I really believe that. So even if for now, the best you can do is, comment on a person's post on a Facebook stroke group and encourage them, that's awesome. That's exactly what I mean by this. So there's a whole spectrum of how it is you can give back. It doesn't have to be as formal as doing something like going to a stroke rehab and, going twice a week. That's, kind of the ultimate. We don't need you to, go above and beyond. We just want you to be a force of good in the stroke community. And I really believe that there's no one who is in a better position to give support than someone who's been in that person's shoes. That's a real limitation that I have as a doctor, is as of today, I have not lived through a stroke. 1 in 4 people after the age of 29 will have a stroke. And so, I certainly don't count myself in the, oh, that's never going to happen to me category. I mean, it's, 25% of adults will live through what you all are living through. Anytime I've talked with a person in the hospital who's had a stroke, I always want to lead with, here's how I think you might be feeling. This is how other people have told me they feel in your situation. But I would imagine having someone who has literally been there to give you hope, to make sure you understand that you're going to be okay and that they'll help you in any way they can. I think that's really powerful. And so as we think about how it is that we can start to set up a better mindset and work on acceptance, we can use things called affirmations. And as part of the stroke recovery guide, the physical book, the workbook that we have included a couple different cards that people can cut out and put on the refrigerator. You can put it on your mirror. That's a great place. Affirmations are positive, empowering words that we say to ourselves or out loud to help move us along psychologically, right? This is the practical part of this. Like, okay, I want that. I want to feel more accepting. I want to feel like I'm okay with this. So how do I do that? Okay. So these are really powerful, actually. So just even say some of these out loud. I am learning to embrace moments of peace when they happen, right? That's really powerful, that when there's a good feeling that kind of settles on us, even if it's for a second, that we savor it, that we take that moment to be very present, take a deep breath. And even if it is for 1 second, there's a wave of peace and calm that goes through our body, because remember, it's not just a feeling, it's a chemical environment in your brain that you're changing. I accept the possibilities for what I can do in my life. I think that word possibilities is very powerful. So possibilities is the opposite of limitations, right? So still believing that no matter what changes have happened to you because of the stroke, if you perceive that you have limitations, feeling like there are still options, there are still possibilities for how you can live your life in accordance with your values, okay? I accept love and affection from all the beings in my life. I love that one. I think that gets back to a little bit of self-esteem. Sometimes people can really struggle with receiving affection, with giving affection. And, we have all beings in here because we all know the power of animals, the power of pets, right? There's probably few things more therapeutic and loving than a dog or a cat or a horse or a rabbit, or, maybe for some, that praying mantis that came to see me that one time. I still think of that little guy, wondering what he was trying to tell me that day and how the hell he got in my house. I love myself as I am right now. And in some ways, that's really what I've been working on for these 10 weeks in our time together. At the end of the day, what this is all about is really loving yourself the way that you are right now. Every day I am learning to accept the impact of my stroke. Some days are easier than others, and that's okay. I think you really have to make space for that ebb and that flow. And I think that's a great metaphor, these ocean waves of coming really close, sometimes going away, and that's natural. What's not natural is to expect that every day you're going to have a great recovery day. If you have that pressure on yourself, if that's your expectation, then everything else is going to feel like a failure. And we don't want you to have that mindset. Okay. I accept my current limits with the same compassion that I would give a best friend. That's really powerful. I just said that to someone yesterday, a patient that I was talking with who was being really hard on herself and denying her trauma and saying, well, you know, I always had food to eat as a child and I had a house over my head, yet she was being abused by someone in the family. And I just asked her, you know, what if I told you today that that was my story and you listened to my story? You know, would you feel like I deserved compassion, if I deserved empathy? And she just burst into tears, because that's really powerful when we think about, well, how would I treat my mom? How would I treat my son if this happened to them? I'm working toward a positive attitude in most situations. I allow myself, oh, I said that one already, sorry. I celebrate my smallest victories and am appreciative for all I have gained in my recovery. I accept the responsibility to improve myself every day in whatever way I can. I'm working to let go of what I cannot control. That's a really powerful one. And I work hard every day to reach my highest recovery potential. So if you have the stroke guide, you can certainly go in there and cut those out and put them around the house. So can you guys believe we're on week 10? It was September when we started this, and it is really my sincere hope that you feel that you have been empowered with this information, and we've helped you understand how to apply the information. It's very good to know it intellectually. It's very important to feel soothed by it emotionally in the moment when we're together, but it's the application of the information that is most important to me and will help you the most. So what we're gonna do in the next 5 or 10 minutes is we're gonna go through the journey that we've been on together, the 10 rules of rehab. So let's start with rule number 1. Make your map. Now, before we get into them, I'm going to tell you, this was a set of rules. It started off as 3 when I had the inspiration a few years ago to write the stroke recovery guide. And very soon it became apparent to me, there's no way it could be 3. It was so much more than that. But it took a lot of research, a lot of reflection, a lot of discussion between me and Carrie to figure out what these rules should be. So these are very well informed. There's not one I regret. There's not one that I wish I would have included. The purpose of the stroke recovery guide and the stroke recovery group is that even if people didn't have access to a neuropsychologist, even if people didn't have insurance, even if they had tried everything in the medical system, if they had access to these 10 rules and they could apply these 10 rules to their rehab, that they would be okay. And that's why what we've been trying to do with the physical guide is get it into rehabilitation centers so that when people go home, if they only had access to these 10 rules, that feeling of being dropped, that feeling of being lost, of not knowing what to do could be reduced. I see that as an additional layer of pain and suffering in stroke recovery that doesn't have to be there. So when we end our time today, I'm going to ask for your help in trying to support us in getting these guides into hospitals and rehabs. And some of you might have ongoing relationships with them, and we would love to partner with you to help other stroke survivors not have to struggle so hard to get information, to get good information. So let's talk about rule number 1. This is make your map. I believe so strongly in the map, and the map provides structure. It provides, it gives us our bearings. It helps us understand what are the stages of recovery. What are the to-dos? What do we have to do? And what we started off this group talking about is taking stock of all your stroke recovery pardon me, all of your post-stroke symptoms, not just the physical. We talked about, intimacy issues, social issues, cognitive issues, mood and behavior, access to care. And I asked you to take stock of those things. And that's part of the interactive part of the guide. We gave you handouts where you can actually do some writing, have someone help you do the writing. And then we encouraged you to, as much as you can, put together a recovery team made up of all the different experts according to your symptoms, and then go to them and talk with them about, here's where I am, here's my goal, right? And we talked about, this is your recovery, where you're at today, where you want to be in a year, 5 years, 10 years, right? And this is your precious recovery that you have to hold in your hand. And you need experts to come in and say, for example, if you have paralysis of your left arm, sure, you can go to the doctor and they can talk about, you need physical therapy. Okay, well, you go do your 8 sessions of physical therapy, but you're still struggling, right? The professionals, the PT, the physiatrist, the neurologist, we want you to advocate to say, so what's the next step? I've gotten some sensation back. Sometimes it hurts a little bit. I can open my hand a little tiny bit. What's not realistic is to think you're going to go from that to a completely back to normal hand and arm, right? There's going to be many, many, many steps between the sensation and the opening up a little bit. So what's the very next thing I could do? Should I keep working on strength? Maybe would I benefit from Botox treatment? Should I do e-stim? Do I need an occupational therapist? There's so many questions that when you know how to ask the right question, which we have in the guide and we've talked about here, you can get yourself a map that basically tells you exactly where it is you need to go in the future, right? It's your GPS for your recovery. Rule number 2 was building on what's familiar. I really, really like that one. That is all about the importance of personalized stroke recovery, that what works for me might not work for you for the exact same symptom, right? And this is where we learned all about brain networks and how it's so important to cater to your brain networks when you're designing your rehab exercises, that no 2 people's brain is the same, no 2 people's stroke is the same, and no 2 people's stroke recovery is the same. And we don't want to pretend that it is. And so I encouraged you to take what you learn in traditional therapy and then figure out a way to personalize it to you. Last week when we were together, a wonderful lady, I want to say her name was Penelope, talked to me in the chat, and I said it out loud to you all, that she had returned to smelling tennis balls, which, have a pretty significant scent. And I just loved that, because even if you're not able to get back out on the court, there's still a part of her brain that is absolutely lighting up, remembering all sorts of things when she smells that tennis ball. So we talked a lot about adaptive activities, adaptive sports, how to bring in music, having a recovery song, having a wind down song, really customizing the exercises to you personally or your loved one. Number 3, we talked about repetition and consistency. And I think we all had our minds blown with how much actual work and effort needs to go into stroke recovery if we look at the animal literature and the science, and that there's a big discrepancy between what you're going to get in, a Blue Cross Blue Shield allowed rehabilitation, approval in reference to what you really need to do to get back as much specifically physical recovery as you can. So we talked about the need to do that. And then we talked about the barrier of neurofatigue, because I'm sure many of you would love to be more physically energetic and involved than you are, but there's a very, very real phenomenon of neurofatigue. And so we demystified that a little bit. We talked about different strategies for that. We talked about a possible role of a stimulant medication, to talk with your doctors about that. And I got a lot of great feedback about that people, because people want to do what they can to get better, but if they don't have access to the information that says this is how many they're going to do, it can feel like you're putting in the work, and when you don't see any results, again, you can get defeated, and then you stop doing your exercises, and you're not going to get better. Number 4, we talked about your creative power. We talked about trying to incorporate things like cooking and dancing and art, even being an art appreciator, even looking at beautiful visual images has been shown to improve visuospatial skills in people recovering from a stroke. It's very, very important that you try to bring some joy, some spontaneity. Recovery from anything can't just feel like an uphill battle every day. No human being wants to feel like it's always work, 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 work. You have to make sure you bring in some color and some joy and some laughter. And so we talked about all of those important things in Rule 4. Rule number 5 was prioritizing sleep. And again, I got a lot of great feedback from you all about advocating for a sleep study. And I know I was shocked by the percentage of folks who are at risk for developing a sleep disorder after stroke, about 70%. That's pretty significant. And we talked about how that can limit your ability to get better. Some people had sleep apnea before the stroke, and it's a risk factor for stroke, but many people, due to the parts of the brain, especially those posterior back part of the brain strokes, are at risk for central sleep apnea and obstructive sleep apnea, a little bit of poor coordination with the respiratory muscles. So we talked about the importance of continuous sleep, to where people can go in and out of the 5 stages of sleep effortlessly. We talked about how when you wake up a lot, it's not great for you because you start back again at the front of the line. You don't get to jump into stages 4 and 5, which are the deep sleep and the REM sleep stages, where we know the purpose of those stages of sleep is brain restoration. And so after a stroke, it's critically important to protect someone's sleep. We don't want people sleeping too much and getting out of whack with their sleep schedule. We do want to try to consolidate the sleep schedule over the course of a day and help people be more alert during the day. We want to try to stay within that natural rhythm. Sometimes after an extended hospitalization or rehab, people's sleep-wake cycle is all out of whack just from institutionalized care. The lights are on when they shouldn't be. Sometimes the shades are drawn during the day when they shouldn't be. It's very hard to get a good night's sleep. And so especially when someone comes home from rehab or the hospital, we want to protect their sleep very fiercely. We know, though, that folks who've had a stroke are going to be prone to doze a lot during the day for 2 reasons. One is the brain is having to work really, really hard to process information and to function after a stroke, because most things we do in the brain requires the whole brain working together. And now we've got this focal brain injury from the stroke, and our processing speed is going to be slower no matter where in the brain you've had your stroke. Life moves very fast. People speak very quick. There's a lot going on at any given moment. And so folks with stroke can feel very, very overwhelmed and kind of behind a couple paces, and that's just humanly frustrating. So the brain is having to kind of work overtime, which makes anyone tired. The other thing is the brain is smart, and it wants us to sleep because it's desperately trying to clear out the debris from the stroke. And so we want to respect that our loved ones with stroke are going to want to sleep more. But we also want to make sure that they don't have the opportunity to just kind of doze in and out all day. There really should be structured time, repetition. We do this at this day. This is our time for being active. This is our time for resting. We talked about the power of music and some meditation, mindfulness. And at night, this is when we really protect our sleep. Things like making sure the room is really dark, a little bit cold, putting the temperature down a couple notches. Some nice white noise. We talked about the role of some really nice low dose melatonin, that can help people get back on track, and using a sleep tracker, that's something that I recommend. They're nowadays $20, $30. You hook them up to your smartphone, and it can actually tell you exactly how many minutes you get in REM sleep, how many times you wake up, how many minutes it takes you to fall back asleep. Pretty powerful stuff. And you can use that data to go to your doctor and to have an informed conversation with them. Rule number 6 was increasing your emotional resilience. I really like that one. This was the one where we talked a lot about how common post-stroke depression is, how your attitude is so important, how we want to keep your mindset positive. And I hope that we were practical in our instruction on that. It wasn't just a bunch of lofty words, that we actually talked about things you can do in a given day to make yourself more emotionally strong, because attitude is a huge determinant of recovery. And number 7, we turned the tables to our awesome caregivers and talked about supporting those who support you. This stroke did not just happen to you, it happened to the people that care about you and love you and help to take care of you every day. We tried to, for that hour, put ourselves in their shoes and increase our empathy for the sacrifices that caregivers of all kinds make. There's, caregivers who help with, taking out the trash now, and there's caregivers who provide total and complete life support. And I really feel strongly that we need to do better by our caregivers. There's far too few resources for caregivers. It's such an unbelievably all-encompassing job, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially. And for so many people, they just don't have enough help. And we also talked about, some of the strain that can happen in families after a stressor like a stroke. Can be really, really hard on families. So we really talked about making time to address those issues in important relationships, to just in a safe, calm, peaceful time, ask people, what's it been like for you as I've gone through this, and making sure that you really express your appreciation. We talked about in word, in touch, and in deed. Number 8, probably my favorite one, is acknowledge your trauma. We talked about post-stroke, post-traumatic stress. And like I said, it may not have totally been for you, that rule, but I think so many of you can relate to it. And I just really hope that it's validating, because I know so many people have a trigger, whether or not it's going back into the bedroom where you had the stroke, whether or not it's hospitals, whether or not it's, a pain in your head. And people just don't understand why all of a sudden they get their heart racing and they sweat. It's just a very normal physiological response, sending out an alarm system that, I'm worried that something life-threatening could be happening, right? And so we talked a lot about how to get yourself grounded, how to avoid avoidance, right? We talked about re-experiencing avoidance, hypervigilance, and negative views on the world. And so we talked about how a lot of PTSD is really a tension between high intensity scanning the environment, kind of always waiting for the shoe to drop, but then also really trying to avoid thinking about it, talking about it, avoiding hospitals. And that's the pain, the struggle of PTSD, is in a way, it's all you can think about. But on the other hand, it's the last thing you want to think about. And so that's where a huge energy suck can happen for people. And why it's so important to talk about is because what if you already have neurofatigue, and there's that layer that's, really brain-based, and now on top of it, you've got some PTSD, and that's also an energy drain. So my thought is anything that can be identified and treated, even if it takes off 5% of someone's pain, 5% of their fatigue, then it was worth it. Number 9, insisting on follow-up care. We reviewed that one pretty thoroughly before. And number 10, we did today, the transformational power of acceptance. So the idea is you're not going to put all these together in 10 weeks, right? This is now your guide for going forward in this lifelong journey you have of your stroke recovery. So what's in my heart is to please take the information that you learned here with me and apply it in your life at every opportunity. If you've been with us for any of these live sessions, you get a copy of the recorded version for later, and you have access to these at any time. If you need a refresher, you go back to that rule, you remember what we talked about, and you keep working at it. Just like life, you do not have to do this recovery perfectly. You can get focused, you can work really hard, you can remember everything I say, you can lose your way, you can get unmotivated. we just want you to come back to it. Okay. So the goal is to do your best more often than not. I really like that metaphor of the ocean waves. Let's really go with that. Okay. Sometimes you feel like you got this recovery and it's right there and you can see it so clearly. And other times it really feels like it's outside of your reach. So my parting words, look at this. I brought you guys some flowers. Isn't that nice? I brought you a beautiful bouquet of, who knows the name of those flowers there? Ranunculus. I always think that's a funny name. Sounds like a monster or something, ranunculus, but they have the most beautiful, papery thin little leaves there. And they usually come in these beautiful pink colors. I want you to please remember that you are not your stroke. A stroke happened to you, happened to a part of your brain. It changed a lot for many of you. I'm sure there's been some real suffering. Maybe it's still happening. It has been really scary. Sometimes it might still be scary. You may have had to rebuild and accept new challenges. But at the end of the day, do not ever forget that you are still you. Underneath all the attention and focus that has been put on the stroke, how much of your energy it's taken, at the end of the day, you are the same soul, you are the same spirit, you are the same person, okay? Please continue to pursue your hobbies and your passions as best you can. The most important thing is to stay consistent with your values. Think about what's the most important thing to you. Is it your family? Is it helping other people? Is it realizing your potential? Is it living a creative life? Is it acquiring knowledge? No matter what it is, you will find a way to continue living that life of value. And don't forget that you have other jobs besides the stroke recovery, and that is to lose yourself in music, laugh when you can, get hugs, give hugs, go out and look at those beautiful stars. And the most important thing I want to say as we end our time together is really thank you all so much. I have really enjoyed being here with you. The emails that you send to me mean so much. It really helps me understand the gap in care and information that we are filling with our I Care for the Brain program. And it means a lot to me to be able to contribute to your care from afar. I wish you all the very best in your never-ending, ongoing recovery. And remember that you are so strong, okay? My parting words are that you really are a stroke warrior, and I'm so, so proud of you. Folks who have been through an unexpected life event like a stroke are so brave, and really we should all have such high respect for folks who get up every day and keep trying. So we're going to end our time together with our self-empowerment statement, and we're all going to say it together, okay? Please, please, please say this one in your head or say it out loud. I am a stroke warrior, and I am so proud of me. I want you to feel that. I want you to feel proud about every day when you get up, every day when you keep trying, every day when you try to do your very best. Really, really, really important words. The Stroke Recovery Group is based on the Interactive Stroke Guide. If you haven't had a chance to get that, you're more than welcome to go on our website listed here below and get yourself a copy. We have a PDF version and an actual version we can send you to your house. So before we do our final question and answer, I wanted to give you all that invitation for helping me move these conversations forward and more into the public eye. So if any of you have any kind of relationship with the rehab that you went to, or a physical therapist, or a neurologist, or a physiatrist, please get in touch with me and Carrie, and we will be more than happy to send you a guide or two that you could pass along to them free of charge, with the idea that we want this guide into the hands of every person who has had a stroke. This is not a moneymaker for us. This is really a passion from the heart. There's no reason for people to suffer after a stroke more than they have to. And I truly believe that, the year and a half, 2 years that we put into this guide was time very well spent, and we just need more people to have access to it. So if any of you have any connections, any supports, we're trying our very best. I was on the North Carolina Stroke Advisory Zoom call last week, trying to ask different rehabs to partner with us. We got some really nice feedback from Duke Medical Center, from their telehealth stroke program, and we're hoping to have a meeting with them in the next week or two. So we're working really hard on our end, but there's nothing like a personal referral. So that is a plea from me and Carrie, is that if there's anything out there anyone can think to do to help us push this information out, we would be so appreciative. So now we're going to do our final Q&A, and I wanted to actually put a question out there for you all. And that is, if you're comfortable writing in the little chat box there, what's the thing you've gotten out of this group that's been the most helpful? And if you can't think of anything off the top of your head, that's okay. But it's really good for me because, like I've told you all many times, I haven't had a stroke. And so this is what I think would be helpful, what the literature has been helpful, tells me would be helpful. But it's really important to me to know from real life people what action have they taken based on something they've learned here. You can either write it in now for us to talk about, or send me an email once you have a chance to think about it. That's the fuel that really keeps us going. And Jerry and I were talking beforehand, and I asked him, could you chime in and tell me because he's been so generous with his words about what he enjoys. And so Jerry says here, after last Thursday's session, I made an appointment with my neurologist since it's been a year, and we're getting a complete blood panel done. Yes. And I also have an appointment with the neuropsychologist. Thanks to you and Carrie for locating one in my city. Oh my God. That's like the ultimate dream, is that more people will see a neuropsychologist as a result of this group, as a result of watching me on Facebook. I really feel strongly that everyone who's had a stroke deserves a neuropsychologist. Think about it. You've got a lot of the same wisdom a neurologist has, but you actually have someone who thinks about you as a whole person, who cares about your mood, who cares about your education and understanding what's happened to you. That's so, so, so important. Jerry also said, I have enjoyed every 10 sessions and would like to see you continue on doing these. You really have a passion for brain health and you are so authentic. Oh, Jerry. Oh my goodness. If we could just get to some cloning, then I would have time to do everything that I would like to do. We are definitely trying to think more about how we can stay connected with people. Some of the best stuff that's happened to me through COVID is getting more comfortable with Zoom and being able to reach people more. Right now, my practice, Pinehurst Neuropsychology, is 100% telehealth. I do not feel comfortable opening up for the health of my community, the health of my older adults and my staff. So we're here on Zoom all day, every workday. And it's been great for our I Care for Your Brain program. There's telehealth laws that have changed that have allowed me to talk with people from all over the country. And we know for a fact what we're trying to do in the next month or two is to improve our social media game in terms of the quality of things like our Facebook Lives and what we put on the YouTube channel. For 3 years, it's just been me with my phone in my office. And, some of our videos have, 30, 50,000 views. So there's signs that, it's going good. But I think if we could make it look a little bit more, maybe professional, that we could maybe promote it a little bit better and we could get the word out that way. I love doing the free lectures every week. It's definitely a lot of work. Each one takes me about 4 to 5 hours. And, I run a practice and I have a family. And so it's really hard to find time to do everything I want to do. But you all have really been great. And I just have enjoyed this time so much. It's hard to imagine 10 weeks has already gone by. Heather's asking me, do you do Zoom for Cali? If you go on our website, I Care for Your Brain, icfyb.com/talk, that's where you can look at the map of the United States, and we have the ones highlighted where we're able to do telehealth. What we're really hoping is that the whole country opens up. There's some idea in about maybe 6 months, we're going to be able to apply for like a nationwide license. Right now, the way psychology works is you have to have a license where your feet are, and you have to have a license in the state where the patient's feet are. So throughout COVID, I think there's 13 states that have opened up, and I have like, I can see 10 patients over the course of, 3 months or whatever it is. I do have a license in New Jersey for 6 months, which is pretty cool because I'm from New Jersey, but they were the only state that really opened it up where you didn't have a limit on how many people you saw. So, I do consultations. We don't really do testing or evaluations because I'm not credentialed with insurance panels from other parts of the country. And, it's pretty expensive, self-pay. So I don't think that's very accessible. We try really hard to make things affordable for folks. Miss Penelope said, realizing that some of my physical issues were not normal and need to be assessed. That's awesome. We'll be checking in with a PT. Thanks so much for these 10 weeks. All of it has been extremely helpful. Oh, Penny, that's so nice of you to write. I'm so glad that you've been here for the whole 10 times. You guys are like the maiden voyage. If we ever do this in the future, you all can say, I was there the first time she did it. So we're really, really proud of you guys who've been able to commit to all 10 sessions. Jerry says, I'd really love to have you as my doc. You know me, you guys are so sweet. It just is going to be really fun to see what the future holds, right? How does telehealth change? There's all sorts of not so great things coming down the pipeline for health insurance. Just today, I was reading about how Medicare next year is going to give all of mental health providers an 11% pay cut, which is quite a lot. And whatever Medicare does, other health insurance companies do. And there's two reasons. One is they're trying to pay for the incredible cost of COVID, and they can't run at a deficit. There's a government rule that says Medicare has to have a balanced budget. And so guess where they think they're going to find the money? It's in mental health, right? Not only neuropsychology, but as we all know, the anxiety and the depression is like through the roof right now. So I share all of that with you to say there's all sorts of creative ideas going through my head if that's really a viable future for me to stay in the insurance-based world. Some people go off on their own and they just try to, turn into a nonprofit, which is an interesting idea, and try to get donations from corporations, and then they're able to give their services away for free. If I had my druthers in a perfect world, that's exactly what I would do, because I know so many people out there cannot afford to come see a doctor like me, and I just don't think that that's right. So we'll see. I'm always trying to find ways to reach more people for free or to keep our costs down. All right, let me see here. Okay, Miss Salinda, I committed to all 10, but had to miss so many because my husband had several ER hospital visits. I'm so sorry. I hope you continue to do these webinars. Well, we've done them on other brain health topics. We did one on essential tremor, one on something called orthostatic tremor, which is where the tremor that people have is only when they stand. So that makes life difficult. And we thought maybe we would do one every month or two, but boy, they took me hundreds of hours to put those webinars together. One thing that is going through my mind is a couple years ago when we all started this, I did a series. Jerry, I think this is how you found me. I did a series on like maybe 6 different types of stroke, maybe like a 45-minute free Facebook Live lecture. So I did cerebellar stroke, pons, basal ganglia, brainstem, and maybe one other kind I can't remember, maybe frontal lobe. And those have really been like my bread and butter in getting known in the brain health community. So one thing I was thinking of is maybe redoing them with some updated information, and with the fancy new camera we bought and what I was saying to you before, making everything look a little bit better. I might redo those because I think I get more messages on YouTube and Facebook from people that said, my mom just had thalamic, that's what it is. My mom just had a thalamic stroke, and your video, your lecture was the only thing I could find that really answered my questions, and it really helped my family so much. Like, those are the messages that I get that just, you know, mean so much to me, that in a time of crisis, people were lost and they were able to find the information that I shared, and it helped. That's really what I care about the most. Jerry, you know, I'll do your show anytime. Anything I can do to help. Let me just see if we have any other questions here. All right. Okay, let me get back in here. All right, well, you guys, it's been awesome. Yep, our email, let's see, Carrie, why don't you send that in the handout email that you're going to do this week? Give them the I Care for Your Brain email so everybody can stay in touch with us. Yeah, by all means, if you all have a question, if you know, you find your MRI and you want me to interpret the interpretation, remember, I can't read a scan, and I certainly can't give personal medical advice, but what I'm perfectly legally and ethically able to do is simply help you go through the report, demystify any jargon that we can find in there, help you understand what it means. Okay, so that's a free offer to anyone who has participated in our time together. That would absolutely be my pleasure. So you can email it to us, and I'll get back to you. And then, of course, Salud wanted everyone to know that she shares tips on Fridays on her Facebook Live, Tom and Salud's Real Life Redo. Oh, you're so sweet. You give me credit for the tips. Well, here's the thing that's kind of interesting, you guys. Of course, some of this is my ideas, my clinical experience, but how I really think of myself is I'm kind of like a translator. There's this whole world of science and research journals, and then there's the public. And I think I kind of put myself in the middle, and I translate this too, you know, complicated, wordy, inaccessible stuff. And then I say it in a way that people can understand and benefit from. And that was something during my time at Boston University, at Harvard Medical School. I never liked how inaccessible things sounded. It always sounded like it was so fancy for a professor or for an academic. I want to know, how do you tell that to someone living at home whose husband has Alzheimer's? What does that research insight mean to them? And I think it's because how I started my career was as a caregiver. I was a direct care provider from the time I was about 15 until I went to college when I was 21. And so I understand brain health challenges on a very day-to-day level. And I think that's part of why this has been a successful experience, because I'm not just talking from books, but I have also had the good fortune to go to these incredible academic programs. And so the whole time I was in them, I was basically listening out of two ears. This one was kind of the application ear. How would this trickle down into real life? How could you instruct people on how to get better based on this? And this one was, you know, the kind of, you know, more of like the interested side or the intellectual side, you know, taking in what did they really mean and then translating it to real people, real world. That's what I love to do. So you guys, you're all just so wonderful. And I just, you know, we care so much about what you're going through. And, you know, we're always here in any way that we possibly can be to support you in your never ending, ongoing, successful stroke journey. So let's all say a quick prayer for each other as we part ways. Know that we'll see each other again. Stay in touch on the Facebook page, and know that we care about what happens to you very, very much. Take care, you guys. I'm going to go cry into my ice water here. We'll see you all again someday. I promise we'll find a way to get the band back together. Bye-bye, you guys. Take care.